I'm going to show you a game featuring the King's Indian defence. It is really tense, I think a fascinating struggle. So this is from the Chess.com Speed Chess Championship, the final between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen. I should say thank you to Robert for subbing for me while I was away for a few days. And I think, it's really interesting games that he showed. And I think this one is pretty good too. So Hikaru Nakamura playing white. Magnus Carlsen, it's the final. Well, you know the result already. Nakamura just edged the final. It was pretty tense. I didn't get to see it live, so I'm not sure exactly what time control this was played at, but it's blitz anyway. So King's Indian, normally we see Hikaru on the black side of the King's Indian defence. Here we have Magnus playing black, so that's kind of interesting. And Hikaru goes for this move, bishop d3. Now, this never used to be played in the past. Standard moves here, bishop e2. One can also play with h3, that's very trendy. But bishop d3 looks kind of funny. Of course, it's possible to play bishop g4. That looks like the move which should exploit bishop d3 because black is trying to get some dark square control in the middle. But of course, white can just drop back with bishop e2. And then you have to ask yourself, is the bishop well placed on g4? So that's kind of the idea. But anyway, Magnus goes for knight d7. So he's playing in the standard way, looking probably to play e5. h3. Okay, now we can see what Hikaru is up to. That actually this is potentially part of a grand attacking plan on the king's side. g4 could be coming. Or it could just be that he wants to put the bishop on e3 and prevent knight g4. a5, so that's a preparatory move really. It's pretty clear that black is going to have to go for e5. And a5 is an important move because you want to take control of the b4 square. Bishop g5, so this is kind of finesse. Of course, you can put the bishop on e3 straight away. But bishop g5 is a provocative move. You would like to tempt h6, which is exactly what Magnus played. You don't have to do that. Might be, I don't know, could be better to play e5 here. I think h6 is exactly the move that white wants to see, because now there's a target and also slightly weakens the g6 square as well. So this bishop g5, I think, has been a success for Hikaru already. So e5, now of course white closes the position to get a space advantage. Knight c5 and bishop c2. I think we can see already that white's opening has been a success. So this bishop guards e4, so attacked by these two knights. One sees the bishop here in some variations in the King's Indian. Normally via the Averbach variation, where the bishop sometimes goes bishop e2, the queen perhaps comes to d2, and then the bishop comes via d1 to c2. So that takes 1, 2, 3 moves, and white has achieved this. Whoops, misfire there. Has achieved this in 2 moves. So certainly a gain of time, and I think the bishop stands very well on c2. We know it defends the e4 pawn, also has some influence over these squares. That's quite important. That protects very useful squares when black is counterattacking. But also, through that e-pawn, it looks down to the king side again, and we'll see how significant that is in a second. And now here, Carlsen goes for knight h5. So this is the standard King's Indian move. Perhaps looking to play the knight into f4, perhaps getting ready to advance that f-pawn. g3. Now here is a big moment in the game, because if g3 is a good move, if it works, if it's simply prevented the knight coming into f4, then you have to ask yourself, well, what is that knight doing on h5? The question is it possible for black to play f5. Now, this didn't happen. Now, why didn't this happen? Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of reasons. It could be knight h4 is a pretty good move. Remember what I said about h6 weakening the g6 square. So one could play knight h4 immediately. One could also play like this. Exchange and then play knight h4 because the queen attacks the knight. If the knight comes back, then knight takes f5. There we see that bishop on c2 coming into play beautifully. And if queen e8, now here's a really nice move. Queen d2. Attacking the h6 pawn. And if f4, then exchange on c5 and bishop g6. That bishop coming into play beautifully and winning a piece. And queen d2 is a very awkward move for black. You know, you would be very reluctant to play king h7 when the bishop is on c2. Then you play g4, and obviously, you know, the pin is extremely unpleasant. So f5 is the move we would like to make. It's every King's Indian player's dream. But it's just not very good here because of the weakness of g6. Instead, Carlsen plays bishop d7. Queen d2 again, attacking h6 and king h7. And this is not a pleasant move for black to make when the bishop is on c2. You know, it's going to be very difficult to get in f5. So white has been able to restrict black very well here. And Carlsen's queenside. Why not? The king should be here. You know, our forces are directed towards the king. And white's king is pretty safe on the queen side. I think particularly when there's a bishop here, actually. That really helps. a4. Of course, Carlsen has to go for some kind of pressure on the queen side. And here, I think it's a very interesting moment in the game. Nakamura plays, I think, a very natural move, king b1, but maybe not best. And there's a couple of things that white could do. One is to exchange here. Now, normally, I would say, don't exchange off your beautiful bishop. But actually, after this move, that really nullifies black's queenside play. So black always has to keep an eye on that pawn. It's attacked by these two pieces. You can see that white's king is very safe now. b5 is very unlikely to occur. Even if it did, it would weaken that pawn terribly. You know, where is black's play coming from here? And eventually, I think it's going to be possible for white to break on the king side. You know, perhaps there could be some rearrangement of pieces. You know, maybe this knight coming here and either going for f4 or potentially g4 as well. I think, you know, that's an interesting long-term one. There's also g4. It's possible. Knight f4 and then knight takes e5. So you can see that the tactics are flying here. Pawn takes knight, bishop takes knight, or bishop takes here, bishop takes. So white can win a pawn like that. You know, that's quite interesting. But after king b1, and which looks very natural, I think black is actually okay here after a3 and then knight a6. The knight in many of those variations was vulnerable on c5. But putting it on b4 is much better. Always has the bishop in its sights. And then black can later on prepare either c6 and c5 or go for b5 as well. And this is not an easy position for white to handle, actually. It's still very double-edged. But queen f6 attacks this knight. Well, the knight really should come back here, actually, and that's a bit awkward for black. But listen, this is a blitz game. You know, I'm certainly not criticising these absolutely brilliant players. Frankly, I think the standard in these blitz games is incredibly high. Queen e2, defending the knight. And again, you know, for all these next few moves, I think a3 followed by putting the knight on a6 is a good idea for black. But queen e7, knight h4, rook b8. So Carlsen has a plan. He wants to force through b5. Fair enough. But knight f5 is excellent. So obviously pawn takes allows queen takes knight. Not good for black, particularly with the king on h7, with that bishop on the same diagonal. So queen e8, knight takes g7. Now this is a big win for white strategically. That bishop on g7 looked like just doing absolutely nothing, blocked by that pawn. However, now white has the chance to open up the position. f4, and you don't need to worry about that bishop searing through the position. So f4 feels very natural now, and you know the kingside assault starts. b5 from black. Now I think this is a very important moment in the game, and I think it's fascinating to see how Nakamura played at this moment. So maybe, you know, you'd like to have a little think here. How would you handle this as white? I mean, it's quite clear that the position is reaching boiling point. White is breaking on the king side. Black is breaking on the queen side, trying to get some play down the open file. How would you handle this with white? I'll have a quick slurp of tea. You have a quick think. So here we go. White to play. Well, I think the way that Nakamura plays it is really interesting. Very straightforward. You know, he seizes his initiative at this point. One could simply exchange on b5. Now, don't take, because that would allow black to get pressure on the b file, but just queen f2. Putting some pressure on the knight. Also looking down the f file, that could be very useful. So I think that's a very sensible way to play. But the way Nakamura did it, exchanging here. Okay, he's exchanged off his lovely bishop, but then again, that was a very strong knight on c5. And now d6. So he's just powering through the middle. And here, if he plays rook takes d6, then white is doing very well. This knight is ready to come into d5 and to f6. The rook is good on d6. And at the moment, black doesn't really have sufficient play on the b file. But instead, Nakamura went for a very attractive move. I think in blitz, it would be very hard to resist this move, knight d5. You've cleared the d5 square by sacking your pawn with d6. You throw the knight into d5, threatening a huge fork on f6, threatening a fork on c7. You know, white takes the initiative here. It looks great. And, well, with very little time, of course, it's a blitz game. Carlsen did not react in the best way. In fact, black can play knight h5 here. You know, in a blitz game, this would be very hard to play. I mean, the point is this, that after g4, you know, you want to attack the knight and come in here, but actually knight takes f4, hits the queen, and the tactics are okay. It's just a very hard move to calculate. You know, should white take here and go for an endgame and take here? I mean, that's possible, but it's not so bad for black. You could also play queen f3. I mean, there are lots of moves here. But anyway, knight h5 is best. Queen d8. Now white is better again. And I'm sure this is what Nakamura saw when he went in for this. If d takes e5, very simple move. Rook f1, threatening knight f6 check, threatening the pawn on f7. And obviously, with pressure down the d file, this is just impossible for black to defend. So after this move, Carlsen had to play knight e8 to cover the f6 square. Nakamura took on d6. So it looks like black's position is collapsing here. You know, you can't take here. e5 is just going to power through. Takes on c4 and bishop e6. And now the simplest move is e5. And that just kills that knight, secures the pawn on d6. Excellent for white. But Nakamura took on c5. It looks really natural. In fact, incredibly, black is still in the game with this move and doubling on the b file. Open files count for something here. It's a blitz game. Carlsen took on d6. And now there is a winning move. What is white's winning move? Time for another break. How can white win in this position? The winning move is rook f1. Again, this very simple idea. Threatening knight f6 check. And there's just too much pressure on the d file. White is winning. But e5 played instead, which looks, again in a blitz game, you're going to play a move like that. It looks completely crushing. Same idea. But in fact, here, black can escape with knight b7, attacking the queen. And in fact, black is still in the game here. Incredibly, you know, this bishop stands very well on e6, securing everything. Anyway, rook b5 played, and now this is winning for white. Knight f6 check. Queen takes. So at the moment, Nakamura is a piece up. Carlsen gets a little bit of pressure. And now I really like Nakamura's next move. He keeps it very simple. You know, he doesn't mess around trying to keep this extra piece. He takes black's best piece, that bishop on e6. Just sacks a bit of material back and plays rook d1. This is good technique. So white has rook, bishop and knight against two rooks. This rook activates. If, let's say, rook takes a2, then rook check, and that's going to force mate as rook f7 is threatened. And if black defends against rook d7, let's say rook b7, then just rook d6. You can see that white has the initiative. This is absolutely secure. Rook e6 threatened. Bishop takes a4 threatened. White is winning. If rook c8, then the king can just step out of the way. Actually, there's no harm done there. So I think I really like this move of Nakamura's, just sacking back a little bit of material. And that is the final position. So yeah, I'm sure you know the result. Nakamura just edged Carlsen in this final. I mean, I wasn't watching live. I was busy elsewhere, but you know, I saw all the games afterwards, and I think the standard was incredibly high. And we're going to see more Blitz and Rapid chess coming up soon, because the Blitz and Rapid World Championships are taking place over the board in Almaty in Kazakhstan, starting on the 26th of December. So watch out for that. I will be dipping in and reporting back on what's going on there. And it remains for me to say a very happy Christmas to you all. Thank you all for supporting the channel over the past year. We've seen some very exciting stuff as ever. And if you want to support the channel, then do have a look at patreon.com PowerPlayChess. You'll find the link down there or somewhere. And we will be very grateful for your support. Do check out you get extra videos, you get a newsletter, depending on what level you support at. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.